Welcome to all of you who are participating this morning, in person or online. You'll find the whole services of this church archived on our Facebook page, so you can enjoy them at any time and share them with other people. You'll find our sermons archived on our website. If you receive our email, then you received a fill-in-the-blank notes section for this sermon. If you'd like to get on our email distribution list, reach out to us through our website. You can also find this fill-in-the-blank notes for this morning's message at chrisaltruck.com. I spent my first decade of life without walls. In my first hometown, Sunspot, New Mexico, I lived in the middle of a government-built ring of houses and labs and telescopes. There were no walls anywhere in those neighborhoods. I could walk to the house next door where the Wagners lived and play on the huge rope fort that was in their backyard, strung between the pine trees. I could walk to the top of Hound Dog Hill and visit the Mouters and slip into their underground storm shelter, which burrowed into the rocky soil of Sunspot. I could go across the street and visit Delinda Dixon, my very first crush. And in all of those cases, there were no walls to get in the way of any of those interactions. In fifth grade, when we moved to the metropolis of 1,000 people, Cloudcroft, New Mexico, once again, there were no walls. I could knock on the door across the street where my classmate Tiffany lived and ask her a question about a homework assignment and never have to even pass through a gate or go through a wall. I could go 3 doors down and ask Gary what he was doing this weekend and if I could join him and never have to worry about a fence or a gate or a wall. But when my mom moved to Las Cruces, New Mexico, my brother Craig and I had our first real introduction to walls. Every single house in Mom's neighborhood was surrounded by a wall. This was a high wall made out of rocks and cement, and all of the walls were interlocked with each other throughout the entire neighborhood. So when Craig and I were in the backyard at Mom's house throwing the football and one of us missed the catch, it would sail over the wall and land in the pool of the neighbor next door. We either had to climb up over that wall and risk injuring ourselves on that rough rock, or we had to go through our house, down the sidewalk, up the driveway, through the next house, and into the backyard to scoop up the football. If we wanted to visit our friend Aliris, who lived next door to our mom, we couldn't just go in the backyard and knock on the screen door. We had to go through our house and down the sidewalk and up the driveway and knock on their front door. Well, eventually Craig and I had enough of this. And so we decided to become wall walkers. We would spend entire afternoons walking atop those rock walls, going throughout the entire neighborhood, seeing what we could see. Unfortunately, that didn't last very long, because it turned out that most neighbors didn't appreciate having 2 teenage boys standing on their rock wall looking into their backyard. Not many people appreciated wall walkers. In Jesus' day, not many people appreciated wall wreckers. And that's what Jesus was. He was not only a wall walker, he was a wall wrecker. Jesus gave his life to wreck walls and to build bridges. Jesus lived and died so that we all might learn to live without walls. This comes to a head in our text this morning. We find Jesus at the temple in Jerusalem, and there are 2 walls in place in the temple, designed to keep certain people in and certain people out. There was a wall of obstruction, which made the temple as inhospitable as possible. And there was a wall of rejection, which made the temple as inaccessible as possible. Both of these walls are described in our text today. As Jesus comes to the temple, he finds this particular area crowded with money changers and people selling animals for sacrifice. The scene's not in the temple that we might be thinking of. It's in an area around the temple called the Court of the Gentiles. This market performed a necessary role, selling animals for sacrifice to people who may have traveled quite a distance to come to the temple, and so they didn't have their own animals for sacrifice. It also provided a way to exchange someone's currency for the currency that was required for the temple tax. Priestly authorities had authorized this market to be in the court of the Gentiles. The problem in our text this morning is not that there was this buying and selling going on, that there were animals for sacrifice available, that there was a way to exchange currency. The problem was that all of this was happening in a way that made the court of the Gentiles inhospitable. This was the one place where non-Jews could worship. But now it was an inhospitable place because of the buying and the selling and the exchanging of currency. When Jesus says in our text, "My house shall be called a house of prayer," he's quoting from the Old Testament prophet Isaiah. And in that prophecy, God is describing a time in the future where even outcasts and foreigners will be welcomed into the house of God. But today, Jesus is experiencing the exact opposite. This space designated for outcasts like the Gentiles has been taken over by commerce for the Jews. And so Jesus condemns these temple worshipers because they have failed to make worship hospitable for those who are outsiders. They've done everything they can to make the temple as convenient as possible for themselves, meaning that it's become inhospitable for everyone else. Not only was there this implicit wall of obstruction making the temple inhospitable, there was an explicit wall of rejection making the temple inaccessible. The truth is that while the Gentiles were welcomed in this space around the temple, they were not welcome anywhere else in the temple. There was, in fact, a kind of stone barricade barring their entrance into other parts of the temple. And written on that stone barricade were words like these: "No foreigner may enter within the barrier and enclosure around the temple. Anyone who is caught doing so will have himself to blame for his ensuing death." Can you imagine that? There was a physical structure in place, warning you that if you were not the right ethnicity and you tried to worship with those who were the right ethnicity, you could lose your life. That's the background of our text. And so in this text, Jesus is not only taking steps to abolish the wall of obstruction, but also this wall of rejection. It's what Paul writes about in Ephesians 2 when he says, "For Christ himself has brought peace to us. He united Jews and Gentiles into one people when in his own body on the cross, he broke down the wall of hostility that separated us." When Paul writes about this wall of hostility, he has in mind the background that I've shared with you this morning, especially that physical barrier barring entrance into the rest of the temple. And Paul is saying that Jesus broke these walls down. Jesus refused to allow anything to remain in the faith community that might lead to the rejection of others. That is Jesus' dream for the church. That is Jesus' dream for this church. Now, Stanford has broken down walls, especially when it comes to ethnicity, gender, and sexual orientation. But we might ask ourselves this morning, are there other walls that still exist? Consider some of the demographics of the city of Stanford. The largest age group in Stanford is men and women aged 25 to 35. Are there walls hindering young adults from participating in the life of this church? 6 out of every 10 students in the Stanford public school system are classified as low income. What might we do to further build bridges to these students who are in need? 4 out of every 10 people in Stanford are people of color. Are there walls hindering their full participation in every area of life in this church? 4 out of every 10 people in Stanford speak a language other than English at home. What would it mean for us to be hospitable and accessible in a language other than English? 2 out of every 10 residents in Stanford are not U.S. citizens. Do any walls exist that are keeping them from participating fully in the life of this church? I believe that God is inviting the Stanford church to wreck any wall, to build any bridge, so that people of any citizenship, language, color, class, and age can participate in this mission of learning to live a life of love. We might also think about these issues of hospitality and accessibility as they relate to our ministry contexts. I believe that God is inviting the Stanford church to truly become a place for all, locally, from Stanford's Harbor to Stanford's Hills, regionally, from those who live in New York to those who live in New Haven, and globally and digitally, from people who are offshore to people who are participating online. What walls might exist to keep people in any one of those contexts from participating fully in the life of this church? What bridges might we need to build in order to reach people in each of those ministry contexts and provide spiritual formation for them? Does the person participating online this morning feel as welcome as the person participating in person this morning? Does someone who lives in an apartment down by the harbor feel as integrated into the life of this church as someone who lives in a house near the hills of Stanford? What would it mean for us to truly embrace our regional reach and truly enable those who don't live in Stanford to fully participate in the life of this church? Later this year, Stanford's staff and elders will spend some time prayerfully dreaming about all of these questions and opportunities. In March, in just a few weeks, the staff and elders will gather for a workshop as we wrestle with some of the short-term and long-term implications of being a church during quarantine and after quarantine. And while specific plans for this congregation may flow out of this gathering in March and a retreat later in the year, there are some things that we know today. Number one, we're expanding the leadership of the Stanford Church. We've invited some elder candidates to attend some training designed to help them understand what it means to serve as an elder in this congregation. And when that training is done, we hope to present you some elder candidates for prayer and affirmation. Second, we're near completion of Stanford's Industrial Kitchen. We're taking the final steps for the process of certification, and we're already prayerfully anticipating the many ways that this commercial kitchen could be used to serve this community in so many ways. Third, we're making continued improvements to our online presence. We're in the time when the majority of our ministry is being done online, and so we're trying to make intentional developments here, from steps toward continually improving the way that we stream our Sunday morning services, to improvements to our website, to the release of a church directory and database that will allow Stanford members an easier time of connecting with each other online. John Perkins writes about a health clinic that he opened in rural Mississippi in the 1970s. He and his wife, Velma, purchased an old clinic that used to be in a place that was predominantly white. Once the sale was completed, they had the keys in hand. They went inside the clinic. A number of friends joined them there. And the first thing they noticed was a wall in the waiting room. It divided blacks and whites. Whites had one waiting room, blacks had another waiting room. John had seen many of these walls during his lifetime, usually only from the black side. But in that moment, he was able to see the wall from both sides, and it confirmed a suspicion that he had. The white waiting room was clean and ornate and pristine. The black waiting room was dirty and worn down. John grabbed a sledgehammer and immediately began tearing down that wall. His friends joined him, and within 30 minutes they had broken down this dividing wall of hostility. His actions are certainly rooted in our text this morning. His is one of many ways to build bridges and to tear down walls. And I want to close this morning with some practical things that you might do to move in this direction. You can build bridges and wreck walls when you make a place on your prayer list and pray for people whose views are in opposition to your own. When you make a place on your nightstand and read books that are written by or about people who are not like you. When you make a place in your media and listen to music, view art, or watch shows created by or focused on people who are not like you. When you make a place in your tasks and you advocate for the elimination of an injustice that exists in your home, in your school, in your workplace, in your community, in your country. When you make a place in your conversations and you just listen to the person in front of you, especially if they differ from you in some way. And when you make a place on your calendar and intentionally seek out someone different from you to interact with during the day. It's a remarkable vision that Jesus has for us. A life lived without walls. May you experience that life. May you express that life this week.